The anime begins by showing us one of the most secret places in the entire nation. This is a prison called Namba, which is practically impenetrable, located on an island in the sea. It is also the greatest security network in Japan and the rest of the world, so it could be said that this is where the most dangerous prisoners in the world are kept. We are also told that escaping from the famous Alcatraz prison is very simple in comparison to this one, since Namba has an enormous amount of security as well as incredible technology that allows them to track practically everyone and everything. But just as all of this is being narrated to us, we can see that the prison is on maximum security and high alert because it appears that one of the prisoners has escaped. We immediately meet a guard by the name of Satoru Tanabata. He is shown to be very desperate, clearly aware that he will be in serious trouble if the prisoners manage to escape from the facility. He is interrupted when his supervisor, who we are introduced to, enters the room and asks about the subjects who have escaped. Satoru immediately responds that 4 inmates from cell block 13 have broken out. We are then shown the subjects one by one. First, we meet prisoner number 11, whose name is Uno. Next, we see prisoner number 25, called Nico. After that, we meet prisoner number 69, called Rock. And finally, we see prisoner number 15, called Jugo, the main protagonist of this story. These 4 are running non-stop to avoid being caught, and we can see that Satoru is using the security control panel to begin closing the doors on them. They soon arrive at a kind of room, and Nico thinks they are already safe. However, Uno mentions that they have disguised what they have done, and he immediately pulls out a card and throws it in front of them, revealing that the area is filled with invisible lasers. Uno comes up with a plan because he knows exactly where all the lasers in the area are positioned. After the others try to cross and fall, Jugo walks through without any problem and tells them he has deactivated the lasers. Jugo is clearly a genius. The group is interrupted when the walls suddenly begin closing in on them, but they manage to escape through a vent that was above them. After crawling through the ventilation duct for a bit, Nico realizes that some kind of gas has been released that will put them to sleep if they stay there, so they immediately get out. However, they fall into a trap set by the guards, and a large ball comes rolling toward them. They run and manage to escape, ending up hanging over an electric field. Here we can see that the prison is truly a complete danger, since literally anything in the place can finish them off. Satoru is shown to be very desperate, because if the group keeps evading all the traps, they will actually succeed in escaping from the prison. Right after this, we see a man known as Hajime begin chasing them, since he is the one in charge of Building 13, from which the group escaped. However, Hajime becomes furious when he sees that one of the guards has gotten completely lost inside the prison itself. The group arrives at a fork and decides to take the path on the right. When they reach another area, more armed guards appear and immediately begin shooting at them, hitting Nico with a bullet. Nico starts making a dramatic farewell speech, but at that very instant he sits back up as if nothing happened, because what was fired at him was not a real bullet but a tranquilizer dart. However, for reasons unknown to us, sedatives have the opposite effect on him. He immediately begins fighting the guards, and after defeating them, he also tames the dogs that were about to attack him. The group continues evading various obstacles as they get closer and closer to the exit. After a few hours, they reach a large door, and Jugo mentions that it is the last door of Block 13. Since it has the maximum possible level of security, Jugo says there is no door that can resist him. He places his hand on the fingerprint reader, and an alarm goes off warning that the door will explode when the countdown reaches 0. Jugo immediately sets to work finding the password, and after several attempts he manages to unlock the door before it explodes. The door finally opens and they can see the outside of the prison. As they step out, the group happily breathes fresh outdoor air when suddenly Hajime appears directly in front of them. He tells them they will not be able to escape unless they get past him. Rock immediately launches himself at him, but is defeated with a single punch. Uno also runs toward Hajime and tries to beat him in a game of rock, paper, scissors, but after losing he also receives a tremendous punch. Hajime then turns toward Nico, but Nico collapses unconscious from sheer fear, so now it is one-on-one between Hajime and Jugo. And as expected, Jugo also ends up being completely defeated. A little while later we see the group locked back in their cell, being scolded by Hajime himself, who says he is tired of catching them, since apparently the boys attempt to escape multiple times every day. But the group is happy because this last time they actually made it all the way to the exit, which for them is a new personal record. The next day we see Hajime very calm because the group has not tried to escape today. However, he is interrupted by Satoru, who tells him that the protagonist wants to speak with him. Hajime immediately goes to them, and Jugo tells him he is very bored. Uno also asks if any girls have come to visit him, since he is a lover of women and gambling just like the legendary Pina Colada. We also see Rock's interest, which is fighting other people. And finally we see Nico's interest, which is anime, as he asks Hajime to reserve the limited edition DVD of his favorite anime that comes out next month. Uno interrupts and tells Nico that he could order it, since apparently they are allowed to have a computer in their cell. At this moment the group discovers that a killer has been caught, and they all beg Hajime not to bring him into their cell. A little later, the group discusses what the outside of this prison might look like, and Jugo tells them that he has escaped from many prisons, but that the food at Namba is the best he has ever tasted. Everyone then begins discussing the privileges they clearly enjoy in this prison, and Uno mentions that there is no point in escaping if they live better inside this prison than they would on the street, since if they actually managed to escape, no one would give them a job and they would have no home to go back to. Jugo comes up with the idea that they could turn this prison into their new home, but the others comment that this would make them freeloaders. A few hours later, Jugo is brought back to the cell because it seems he tried to escape again. He tells the others that he managed to see something completely different from the usual, as he caught a glimpse of a woman inside the prison. He begins describing her as a very young and very attractive woman, so everyone starts arguing and claiming that she came to see them specifically. They end up leaving the cell, and right in front of them stands Hajime alongside the girl. They begin teasing Hajime by saying he should have introduced his girlfriend to them sooner. However, the girl introduces herself as Hitoshi Sugoroku, Hajime's younger sister, leaving everyone completely shocked. Right after this, we see a helicopter arrive at the prison and a girl makes her way to the offices. Here we meet Momoko, the warden of Namba prison, who asks to speak with Hajime. Satoru immediately goes to find him and lets him know the warden wants to speak with him, so Hajime clearly leaves the area. Satoru mentions that it is time for Jugo to go back to his cell, but the girl asks to speak with him, and Jugo agrees as long as she fills out the visitor paperwork. In a scene transition, we see Hajime speaking with Momoko and giving her a report on the inmates of Block 13. She mentions that they should not underestimate them, especially Jugo, who is known as the Eternal Fugitive. This is because he has escaped from a great many prisons before arriving at Namba. Back with Jugo, he is speaking with Hitoshi, and she asks if he can remove the shackles on his neck and hands, since he mentioned that he can open any type of lock. However, Jugo responds that those shackles were put on him one day while he was sleeping. He also mentions that none of the people in this place know how to remove said shackles. And finally he adds that on that day, he was able to catch a glimpse of the silhouette of the person who placed them on him. However, despite having escaped from dozens of prisons around the world, he has not been able to find the guard who put the shackles on him in order to have them removed. Jugo adds that he feels like they are stealing his freedom, and so he knows that ultimately the person who placed them on him is the only one who can take them off. Several days later, we see the warden having a discussion with Hajime about Jugo and the rest, since she finds it very strange that the group is not trying to escape the way they did in other prisons. Finally, Hajime formally takes his leave of her, and we see that the girl is left completely flushed, as she clearly has feelings for him. On the other side, we see Hajime running desperately, because he thought the girl had discovered the escape attempt by the group a few days earlier. The following morning, Hajime goes to take attendance for Jugo's group and realizes that Jugo is not in his cell, so he immediately triggers the alert. But he ends up discovering that Jugo was asleep in his own house. Jugo explains that since Rock snores so much, he decided to escape so he could sleep in peace. A few hours later, we see Rock and Jugo having lunch, and they are delighted by how delicious the food is. We are then introduced to a prisoner who now works for the prison named Shiro, who is responsible for cooking that food. The group tries to make small talk with him, but he is very reserved and does not say a single word. A little while later, we see the group with a Rubik's Cube, which Jugo solves completely and very easily. Uno also gives him a combination lock puzzle, which Jugo opens just as easily since, as you may remember, Jugo has an incredible ability for opening locks, escaping, and things of that nature. The group is interrupted when they are told it is time to work, since apparently on certain days all the prisoners are put to work. And as expected, Jugo finds making dressers incredibly boring. Hajime approaches Jugo and Rock and tells them that thanks to their skill they are responsible for creating various pieces, since the furniture and other products made by them are worth a fortune outside the prison market. We also see that Nico created a wooden robot. However, since that was not what Hajime expected, he ends up hitting him. Uno also made a wooden waifu figure, and he likewise ends up getting beaten for doing that sort of thing. Finally, Jugo and Rock finish the dresser, and Hajime is completely impressed by it. That afternoon, Satoru and Hajime have a conversation about how worried they are knowing what will happen to them if it is discovered that Jugo and the others can escape. But just as expected, at that moment, Jugo appears right next to them and is immediately handcuffed. Jugo begins talking with his supervisor and tells him he should not feel bad, because it is clearly Jugo himself who escaped, and that Hajime is the only one responsible for his own escape, and should not care if others find out they can get out of their cell. A few hours later, Hajime makes his way to see the Warden, and we can see that she is very far away since he even has to take several trains within the island. On the other side, we see Momoko very anxiously awaiting Hajime's arrival. Back with the supervisor, we see him passing through several security doors, and after entering a room we see that there are several people who know him. These are the supervisors of the other sections of the prison, since, as you may remember, the prison is divided into several sections, and Hajime is responsible for Block 13. Finally, Hajime enters the warden's office, and after delivering his reports, we see the two of them accidentally brush fingers, which causes Momoko to become extremely nervous. The guard who was there with her hits Hajime because he thought Hajime had knocked her documents off the desk, but Hajime immediately gives him a good beating in return. They then begin discussing the escape report for the group, and Hajime says that they feel comfortable being there. Momoko thinks it is very strange that after having escaped from so many prisons, they do not want to escape from Namba. Hajime then begins explaining the reasons why each of them escaped from other prisons. In Nico's case, he is American and was buying drugs in poor neighborhoods, and after being used as a mule his sentence was reduced. But after a medical examination, several illnesses were discovered in him, so he was transferred to a medical reformatory from which he eventually escaped because he hated needles and medicines. But now that he is at Namba, he is very happy because his medications are given to him as tasty flavored pills. The next one they talk about is Rock, who like Nico is also American. Hajime mentions that he was sent to the reformatory because he was stirring up gang fights. Momoko thinks he must be very violent, and one of the guards has a theory that he was a very violent fighter. However, everyone is left shocked to hear that the reason he escaped was because the food at that place was terrible, and since the food at Namba is very delicious, he has not tried to leave. Next on the list is Uno. The supervisor mentions that he was a compulsive gambler who visited underground casinos, and the reason he escaped is that he always had dates with girls. In whatever prison he was in, if he had a date lined up, he would end up escaping to keep it. Finally, they get to Jugo, and Hajime mentions that he is Japanese. He was arrested because he broke out and escaped on the very same day. He is also mentioned as being the prisoner with the highest number of escapes and arrests. And when the guard asks why he escapes from prisons, Hajime responds that he does it simply out of habit. In short, Jugo sees escaping from prison as a hobby. Finally, Hajime says they have nothing to fear since he sees no intention of escape from Jugo's group. Momoko takes the supervisor's words well and responds that she will be at ease. Hajime then leaves the office. A little later, we see Jugo talking with his group and telling them that being in prison makes him feel like he is at home. In a parallel scene, a boy is shown who we will get to know better later on. A few days later, we see the warden receiving a call from another prison. As it appears, a new inmate will be transferred to Namba. In a scene transition, we see Satoru crying and going to Hajime because the group has been making his life difficult. Hajime has no choice but to tell him that he needs to toughen up since he is a guard, so he cannot let anything the inmates do affect him at all. He also adds that they never listen to anything he orders them to do, and Hajime tells him that if that is the case, he will have to lay down the law with them. We are then shown a memory of Satoru being near Jugo and the others. They began harassing him to such a degree that he had to run out of the area crying. Back in the present, Hajime scolds the boy harshly and tells him he seems like he was not born for this job. Furious, Hajime tells him he is very weak and that he needs to have more commitment to his work. Finally, he offers him some words of encouragement and tells him he will have to try much harder, since if he manages to do his job correctly at Namba, he could practically work anywhere else in the world. Hajime mentions that he will have to teach him how to deal with Jugo's group. He immediately begins listing the weaknesses of each one of them, and mentions that in order to control Jugo, he should focus on the other three, since Jugo is mostly motivated to escape when the others also want to. But if he can manage to keep the others entertained, Jugo will lose interest in escaping and it will become much easier to keep him in line. Satoru thinks that rather than prisoners, it seems like they have to look after them as if they were in a daycare. Hajime then leaves and heads straight to see Momoko. The girl tells him she wants to place the new prisoner in Jugo's cell since she wants to experiment with what will happen when a new member is added to their cell. Hajime accepts her request and responds that as soon as the new inmate arrives at Namba he will put him in with the rest, and immediately takes his leave. On his way out he runs into Satoru, who tells him that thanks to his advice, Jugo and the others have stopped bothering him. Hajime also tells him to get ready because a new inmate will be coming to cell 13. In a scene transition, we see Jugo and the group commenting about the new inmate. Jugo worries that it might be the killer they caught, and some of them are a little scared about the idea of sleeping next to someone who kills people. The group is interrupted when Hajime arrives and introduces the new inmate. The newcomer makes a ninja-style entrance and introduces himself as inmate number 99, and we learn his name is Tetsukumo. Jugo stares at him thinking he is very weird, but the others get excited when they see him introduce himself as a shinobi, a Japanese ninja. The excited group tells him they have never seen a real ninja before, but Jugo tells them that ninjas do not just walk around in the streets. Tetsukumo gets angry at Jugo, immediately puts a knife to his throat, and tells him that he is in fact a real ninja. A flashback is then revealed showing the boy as a real shinobi from the land of the ninjas. He was supposed to live as one of the shadows and not let anyone discover him. However, Tetsukumo begins to cry because he ended up getting arrested for being a very suspicious intruder. He then tells Jugo that he does not plan on staying there for long, since being a shinobi makes it very easy for him to escape. Jugo mocks him by pointing out that despite being a shinobi he still got caught, to which one of the group tells Jugo he cannot say that since he has also been caught. Tetsukumo then challenges Jugo to a competition to see who can escape first. Jugo's ego will not allow him to be mocked, and he ends up accepting the challenge, agreeing to meet at midnight. A few hours later midnight arrives and the group gets ready to see who is the best. The rest of the group also goes along to judge which of the two will win. After Jugo has opened several security doors, he mentions that Tetsukumo has done nothing but follow them. At that moment they are interrupted by Hajime, who arrives and tells them he knew they were planning an escape. Tetsukumo springs into action and after attempting to apply a technique on the supervisor, Hajime gives him a very good punch. Tetsukumo tells him he expects nothing less from a guard at Namba. He then uses a ninja technique that scatters many kunai around himself, leaving him completely trapped by his own technique. Here we can see that even though the boy is a ninja, he is not very smart. In a parallel scene, Yamato arrives where Satoru is. They talk about the new inmate and think he poses for every camera in the prison. Both are interrupted when Hajime arrives and tells them he has returned the group to their cell, except for Tetsukumo, who has been punished and left there until the following day. He also says Tetsukumo is going to be transferred to cell 11. Several days later, Yamato arrives on horseback at Jugo's cell unexpectedly. He tells them it is New Year's Eve, so they clearly need to prepare Christmas decorations. Satoru, who arrives at the scene, also tells them they need to clean their cell, since the guards will be responsible for cleaning the main quarters while the inmates clean their own cell. We can also see that in Momoko's office, Hajime and Salmon are present. Everyone begins cleaning while Momoko keeps looking at Hajime. He becomes very nervous because the girl is so clearly in love with him. Several days later, at a meeting with all the supervisors of each wing of the prison, Momoko congratulates each one of them for their great work and tells them that tomorrow a new year will begin and they need to start it with full spirit. After some words are exchanged among the supervisors, Momoko finally wishes everyone a happy new year. Back with Jugo, the group comments on how excited they are for New Year's because of all the food they will have. Jugo is not very enthusiastic about it since they literally spent the year in the same cell. Nico says it has been a good year, and Jugo has no choice but to be a little doubtful about that. In a parallel scene, we see Hajime ringing the bell to mark the new year, and as this happens, Momoko gets very excited with each chime of the bell. The following day, we see the prisoners and their guards celebrating the new year with a traditional tournament held by Namba prison. The supervisor of Wing 4, named Yasakura, introduces the participants from each section. But before this, Satoru mentions that it has been established that guards and inmates collaborate to win the tournament, and if they do, the winning wing and its guards will receive a prize. Yasakura then mentions that Wing 3 will be represented by Jugo's group, and we see that Momoko abused her authority to choose them, leaving both Satoru and Hajime completely shocked. Salmon then appears and tells Hajime that Wing 5 will win the tournament, and we see that the two of them have a conflict over who is the best. The supervisor of Wing 3, named Kiji Mitsuba, also appears, and a conflict breaks out among all the supervisors. The tournament representative, named Mitsuru, then appears and announces that the first activity will be about the most beautiful and artistic calligraphy. The group immediately gets excited knowing that Jugo is Japanese and should have the best calligraphy of all. However, he puts on a performance with a brush, and after writing a little, it turns out to be a complete disaster, leaving everyone completely disappointed in him. They then look at the guards and realize that their calligraphy is completely perfect. This shocks everyone, and Satoru mentions that both of them are licensed masters of calligraphy. So in short, this is what saved the group in Wing 13, represented by Jugo's group, which had the highest score. While this is happening, we see Momoko completely charmed by Hajime's perfect handwriting, thinking she should ask him to write her name. Mitsuru then announces that the next event will be striking Machi on a kind of tile tower. He mentions that completing this challenge will depend heavily on power and physical strength. However, if the tower falls, they will immediately lose. Mitsuru also adds that for this round, Cell 8 from Wing 5 will face off against Jugo's cell. Yamato gives Jugo a mallet, but it falls to the ground because of how heavy it is. Yamato begins mocking Jugo for his lack of physical conditioning, so Rock picks up the mallet and says it is not as heavy as Jugo thinks. Shortly after, the game begins and the guards start striking the Machi. Rock suddenly gets distracted, and the opposing female prisoner lands the hit that knocks one of the tiles out of Rock's team's tower. We then meet the boy named Liang, who mocks Rock by saying the prison has made him soft. Uno tells everyone that the two of them know each other because Rock used to be in Wing 5 before joining their group, and they had a great rivalry long before then. Rock immediately launches himself at Liang, but takes a kick from the boy. We also see that the guards have a rivalry of their own, as the enemy guard rushes at Yamato without hesitation. Back with Rock, we see both of them continue fighting, and a flashback of Liang is revealed in which he was always defeated by Rock. So from that point on, he dedicated himself to fighting and training for this very day so he could get his revenge. Liang asks Rock what he will request as a reward if he wins the tournament, and the answer leaves everyone completely shocked because what Rock says is that he wants a stone oven as a reward since pizza tastes better cooked that way. And he says that Shiro told him they did not have a stone oven. Liang gets angry because this is not much of a motivation to win the tournament and calls it ridiculous. He leaps and begins charging a powerful ancestral fire technique into his leg. However, it is blocked very easily by Rock, who gets angry after hearing that his wish was so ridiculed. Rock grabs Liang's leg and begins spinning him through the air, and after exchanging some words, he sends him flying into the bleachers, leaving him completely incapacitated. The enemy guard gets upset because his ally was clearly defeated with a single move, so Yamato does the same, and after the enemy guard approaches, he gives him a punch that sends him flying, and thanks to all of this they end up winning the round. Salmon, watching all of this, gets angry because they were underestimated far too much. Shortly after, Mitsuru announces that the third event is called Yakun Ishu. Hajime mentions that Satoru will be the next participant, and the group begins mocking him because they think he is no good at anything. This obviously causes the boy to start crying. Mitsuru then explains that this game requires mental strength and a great deal of concentration. 3 participants are also needed, including the guard, since it is a game that depletes mental energy greatly, to the point where they could completely collapse from exhaustion. The third member would be the reserve in case this happens. Jugo becomes very nervous because he thinks they will choose him since he is Japanese, but they are interrupted when Uno tells them that he will be the participant. This surprises everyone, since he does not even know how the game works. Mitsuru then presents the players from Cell 6 and Wing 3, who are Inmate 3 named Troyce and Inmate 82 named Honey, both of whom are a pair who generate a great deal of beauty and radiance in their surroundings. Uno tries to imitate the aura of beauty they generate, but as expected he does not have the same charm as these two, which makes him furious when he sees that no one is paying attention to him. The game begins, and the supervisor of Wing 3 is very confident. However, he is left shocked by how good Satoru is at the game, as he practically won it single-handedly. Hajime, however, is a little worried because Uno still has to win his match. We then see Uno very nervous, and after trying to grab a card, his opponent is much faster than him. We then see that the two opponents are very imposing toward Uno, since they know he is a cheater, and they plan to win before he can figure out their strategy. The supervisor of Wing 3 is very confident, but Jugo begins to laugh and tells her that Uno only wins by cheating. Right after that, the game turns completely around and Uno begins to come back in the match, causing both opponents to become very nervous when they see that Uno does not even need to cheat to win. He also begins revealing in that moment the strategy the two opponents are using against him. Yamato and the others are completely astonished watching how Uno has discovered the technique both opponents were using. All of this makes Honey very angry, and he tells Uno he should not be playing like that and begins accusing Uno of having cheated, revealing himself to be a sore loser. Uno begins mocking him since he has now essentially dominated Honey. Troyce then interrupts the situation and tells him it will now be his turn. This does not scare Uno at all, and he tells Troyce that he already knows his strategy as well. Troyce responds that there is no way for him to discover his strategy since he gives no signal whatsoever about his technique. Troyce tries to grab one of the cards, but Uno is much faster and grabs it very easily. Uno explains to Troyce that he gives two signals before taking a card. The first is the way he moves his mouth, opening it when he moves to his right and closing it when going to his left. The second signal is through his eyelids, blinking once if he will take a card close to him and twice if he will go for one farther away. Here we truly see the remarkable ability that Uno possesses when it comes to this type of game. In a parallel scene, we go to Nico, who disappeared from where the group was. He goes to take his medication when he suddenly sees someone floating, leaving him completely shocked. Back with Uno, he is winning the match, and while it continues, he tells Honey and Troyce that he wants to win because he greatly enjoys spending time with his companions. So after winning, he will ask as his wish that a game room be built in Namba prison. After saying these words, he eliminates the last card and Uno takes the victory. Mitsuru then comments that the next game will involve spinning tops, and suddenly a large hole opens up in the floor, leaving Jugo astonished. Mitsuru shows them the tops and everyone is delighted to see that they are enormous, and they will have to launch them and defeat the opposing top. The first one to destroy or knock out the enemy top will win the game. We are then shown that once again Salmon is the opponent for Hajime. We also see that the other opponents are the supervisor of Wing 3, Kiji Mitsuba, and also Yasakura. Next we meet Salmon's allies, who are inmate 71 called Kai and inmate 58 called Yupa. Nico becomes very nervous because Yupa was the person he saw levitating a short time ago. Niku and Hajime fall into the ring, and without expecting to be opponents, they end up accepting the task of fighting against Salmon. Both of them then grab the rope tied to their top and pull it to start the game. The allies immediately lunge at Hajime, but Nico intervenes because it is not fair for both of them to attack at once. After saying a few lines that a superhero might say, we see him lie down to rest and tell Yupa that as a pharmacist he can fight, and since it is clearly easier for Yupa, Nico is going to take it easy. Both of them are interrupted when Nico launches an attack at Yupa, but it is evaded very easily. Nico, full of enthusiasm, asks if Yupa can teach him how to float the way he was doing, and Yupa responds asking if he saw him during his training called Kiku. On the other side, we see Salmon begin fighting Hajime and telling him that before he is done with his top, he will first be done with him. Both of them begin grappling with each other, and everyone watches as the Warden appears to be watching the fight very seriously. However, it is revealed that she is actually imagining things with Hajime and how she wishes he would be more aggressive with her. The girl is indeed a little bit masochistic. Back with Hajime, after a bit of grappling, he ends up landing a hit on Salmon. However, Hajime manages to dodge a powerful energy blast launched by Yupa. This greatly impresses Nico, who thinks the boy must have superpowers and believes he literally just threw a Kamehameha. And yes, that is effectively what the anime says. Yupa and Nico then begin fighting, and Yupa launches a kick which Nico manages to block. Nico also tells him that he copied that very same technique by imitating it completely. This leaves Yupa shocked, since Nico just copied an attack he saw only moments ago. Jugo is not very surprised by this, and Jugo explains that Nico tends to be influenced by things he genuinely likes and can memorize practically anything. Yupa and Nico keep fighting, and it is mentioned that with each exchange Nico's hits are becoming more and more precise. At one point, Yupa stops and comments that whether he wins or loses, they should take Nico on as a disciple. In that instant, Yupa reveals that he is a supremely gifted master of Qigong, and since he has been locked up, he has had to wait for a disciple to come to him. Nico gets very excited and asks him to be his master. Yupa then tells him he has not understood what matters most, which is winning the tournament, and tells Nico that his wish might be very significant. For this reason, he refuses and says that if he wins the tournament, his wish is actually very meaningful. What he intends to ask for if he wins is the latest existing video game console, since despite having anime and a television, he does not have a game console in his cell. Nico is interrupted when Yupa gives him a kick that drags him several meters. Despite this, Nico asks if Yupa would make him his disciple if he wins the tournament, to which Yupa responds that he has to win it first. On the other side, Hajime continues fighting Salmon, and we see that Hajime has the upper hand. Salmon calls him a liar for telling Momoko that everything in the prison was going fine, referring to the fact that Jugo and the group are always escaping. Despite that, Hajime told the Warden that everything was going very well in Cell 13. This makes Hajime angry because they are clearly questioning the way he does his job, so he grabs Salmon by the throat and the dispute continues. Everyone in the place is left surprised to see that Salmon attacked Hajime and Hajime did not even flinch in response. While all of this is happening, we see Momoko getting very excited imagining things about Hajime. Jugo's situation has clearly driven the girl crazy over him. The fights between Hajime and Salmon continue, and Hajime ends up giving his opponent a thorough beating. Nico also keeps fighting and manages to land a hit on Yupa. The boy has no choice but to charge a powerful energy blast and launch it at Nico, but Nico begins concentrating his own Kai in his hand. Yupa thinks that imitating his pose is useless, but is left shocked when Nico manages to imitate and launch that same powerful blast, causing both Nico and Hajime to win simultaneously. In a scene transition, we see Momoko slightly flushed while reading a magazine. Suddenly, Mitsuru enters the office and manages to read the candy magazine the girl was reading. This makes the girl very nervous, since she does not want anyone to know she likes these things. A little while later, both of them are walking and mention that the finalists for the last event are Wing 4 and Wing 13. Mitsuru adds that it was exactly the same as last year, since apparently these same wings had been finalists before. Momoko also mentions that the reason they hold this tournament every year is to show the inmates the strength that the guards possess, and that it is one of the ways they maintain respect within Namba prison. A little later, we see Salmon in the infirmary from the beating Hajime gave him. He is talking with another guard we know as Inori. Salmon mentions that inmate 71, referring to Kai, had prepared some drugs to affect Nico, since as we know he is a pharmacist who makes poisons and medicines from medicinal plants. But because Nico is accustomed to consuming medicines, the pollen that was in the air had no effect on him at all. Salmon also says that Hajime was not affected because he was not standing in the right direction of the wind. A little later, the presenter announces that they have now reached the final game, and Momoko begins explaining the rules. This one is based on opening a special barrel of sake from Namba, and the first team to open it will be the winner. Only 2 people from each team may participate, those being the guard and 1 additional inmate, so the group tells Jugo that it is now his turn to do something. At the same time, Hajime tells Yamato that he will be responsible for playing this final game, right before heading off to the smoking room. Yasakura appears in front of Hajime and tells him that he himself should participate. Hajime firmly refuses, and Yasakura tells him he had a lot of luck beating him last year. Even though Yasakura keeps insisting, Hajime keeps refusing, but Yasakura tells him to look into Momoko's eyes and try refusing again. In that instant, we see that Momoko has a very terrifying look in her eyes, but it is because she is extremely excited by how handsome Hajime looks. However, since Hajime does not know that the girl is in love with him, he thinks those eyes reflect a threat, so he has no choice and ends up accepting. We then see Yasakura very upset since he is clearly in love with Momoko, and after losing last year he also lost her heart. He now plans to win it back by beating Hajime in the tournament. Yasakura then presents his inmate by the name of Musashi, which leaves Jugo very surprised. Hajime, somewhat confused, asks if Jugo knows him, and Jugo responds that Musashi was his companion on another occasion. We also see Jugo furiously commenting that Musashi was the person who ruined his life. Mitsuru then tells them to prepare and gives the signal for the game to begin. Both pairs run toward the sake barrel, and as expected, Musashi attacks Jugo without hesitation. Uno and Rock are left surprised because Musashi has his eyes blindfolded, meaning his instincts are very well trained. Back with Hajime, we see Yasakura very angry, saying that this year he will win and recover Momoko's attention. Hajime leaps into the air and is caught by one of Yasakura's lassos. However, he frees himself very easily and immediately launches himself at Yasakura. Yasakura begins using his lasso as a shield to prevent Hajime from hitting him. However, Hajime pulls out two pistols and tells him to stop being a lapdog, which is all he has ever been. Yasakura, very nervously, asks where he got those weapons, and Hajime responds that he took them from a chest that said anyone could take weapons from there. Mitsuru then congratulates Hajime for finding those weapons, since for this tournament they managed to add many weapons and shields for various different combats. However, the pistol bullets are made of rubber, and the sword is made of a material that does not cause much damage. Yasakura becomes furious and launches himself at Hajime, but is hit hard with the weapons Hajime is carrying. All of this obviously excites Momoko greatly as she watches her man, and the fight continues with both pairs exchanging many powerful attacks. Yasakura thinks that winning is the only solution to everything, since what Momoko wants in her mind is for Hajime to beat him and steal her heart. Yasakura then says it is time to use his secret technique, and suddenly invisible lasso strikes begin hitting near Hajime. Hajime tries to dodge everything he can, but one of the hits manages to connect. Yasakura tells him there is no way for him to get close enough to land a blow. On the other side, we see that Jugo is taking a very solid beating. Musashi tells Jugo that he had forgotten how weak he really was. He also mockingly tells Jugo that he wants the collar and wristlets that had been placed on him in another prison. Hajime notices and thinks he should help him, but Yasakura immediately tells him he will not be able to match him. After hearing these words, Hajime instantly closes the distance and delivers a punch that sends Yasakura flying. Yasakura cannot believe that Hajime managed to get that close, and Hajime responds that he traced each of Yasakura's movements and anticipated where his next attack would come from by following his gaze. Back with Jugo, Musashi keeps insisting that he wants his shackles, but Jugo responds that no matter how much Musashi wants them, he cannot take them off. Musashi then responds that if that is truly the case, then the only person who could remove them is a man with a scar on his neck. Jugo is shaken hearing these words, and realizing that Musashi knows the person, Jugo fills with rage and launches himself at Musashi to attack. But Musashi charges a powerful fire attack in his hands, which hits Jugo and sends him crashing into a wall. Everyone in the place is left shocked since none of them knew Musashi could do that. Kai then mentions that this is a phenomenon that occurs in certain people and allows their body to spontaneously combust. Despite knowing this, the simple fact that Musashi can launch fire at will still seems very strange to Kiji. While Jugo is lying on the ground, his only thought is to find any information he can to get the shackles off his hands and neck, and he begins to get angry. Suddenly, everyone hears an explosion coming from where Jugo is, and a very powerful aura begins to surge from him. We also see that he manages to produce two swords from his hands, and filled with rage he declares that he will make the people who put the shackles on him pay. All of this while a mysterious figure watches them, and we see that Jugo has taken on a very powerful form with two swords in his hands. In a scene transition, we go back a few hours and see Yamato heading over alongside Tetsukumo, since the boy received a visit from someone who apparently knows him. Tetsukumo is very confused because he does not believe anyone came to see him, and Yamato tells him that this person is very eager to see him. When they arrive at the visiting room, he finds a boy we know as Hanao. Tetsukumo tries to leave when he sees him because he does not want to talk with him, but after a few words persuading him to stay, he agrees to receive the visit. Here we discover that Hanao is Tetsukumo's manager because Tetsukumo was a star. Hanao tells him that he did not take long to find out he had been arrested, but he did not know he was at Namba prison. Hanao also tells him that he lied to the press by saying Tetsukumo had completely disappeared and had been looking for him all over the country. He explains that if it were discovered that a celebrity had been arrested, his career would essentially be over. After giving him some words of motivation to come back and be an actor again, Tetsukumo refuses and says he cannot deceive people. He also tells Hanao that he could easily find a replacement if he wanted to, but those words do not sit well with Hanao, who responds that he will not allow him to remain in this prison. While both of them are arguing, Jugo manages to overhear the conversation from the other side and identifies Tetsukumo's voice. Tetsukumo says that everything that happened is their fault and immediately calls them kidnappers. He also says that he knows his mother is not really his biological mother, and these words leave Hanao completely shocked. A flashback is then revealed showing a woman and a man talking about creating a ninja film. The man tries to explain that those kinds of movies have gone out of fashion, and that they have already created everything possible related to this subject. However, the woman tells him they need to find a real ninja, since there is no better way to portray something than to have an actual professional in that field do it. During the following days in the flashback, both of them dedicated themselves to searching for a real ninja to act in the film. After a long journey, they arrive at the shinobi territory, where they hear a child practicing with his kunai near a waterfall. We can see that it is none other than Tetsukumo as a small child. The director immediately approaches him and asks where the rest of the shinobi inhabitants are. Despite the woman's questions, the boy refuses to answer and begins to cry since he is not yet a member of the shinobi. The reason he is in this place is that he is training, since all the real ninjas ignore him. The woman at that moment takes the boy and gives him some loving words to make him feel better. The boy also tells her that his parents must be disappointed in him because he does not have nearly as much talent as a ninja. The woman then embraces him and tells him that she is his mother and that she is sorry for having left him and knows she was clearly a very bad mother. These words leave the boy in shock, and he believes everything the woman says. The man accompanying her knew she was performing and that she was a professional actress. The woman finally, with a malicious look, says that she will turn him into a true shinobi. A few days later, we see the boy in the building where he works for the director. Very enthusiastically, he tells her that his master is very proud of him and that he has a great deal of talent. And over time, he trained to the point that he became a very accomplished actor. Back in the present with Tetsukumo and Hanao, we see the man applauding Tetsukumo for having uncovered the director's entire plan. He also asks whether now that he knows everything he will continue in the industry, and begins listing everything the woman did for him and the life of luxury she provided. Tetsukumo tells him that all he ever wanted was to be a shinobi, but Hanao, with little empathy, tells him he never had the talent to become one, since the only thing he has talent for is acting in films and other productions. He adds that the director raised him for this reason and that he should not judge her, since at the end of the day she did raise him. He also reveals that he always envied Tetsukumo, since just like him, he was a child who saw her as a mother figure, and she gave that maternal love to Tetsukumo. After delivering a few final words, the man leaves. Tetsukumo steps outside and realizes that Jugo was standing out there listening to their entire conversation. The boy becomes very nervous and puts his ninja mask back on since he had removed it inside. But Jugo tells him he has nothing to fear, since he heard absolutely everything they discussed and now knows the truth about him. Jugo asks if he does not like his work, which is something truly incredible, but Tetsukumo tells him that people only love the characters he portrayed and not his true self. He confesses that when he discovered the truth about his fake mother, he realized that he was only being used as a tool. That was the reason he completely disappeared from the entertainment industry. He also adds that after escaping, he returned to the mountains where he came from to continue training. However, he ended up getting lost and arrived at a private property where he was arrested. After that, he managed to escape and ended up arriving all on his own at the prison itself, which is to say the boy is far too clumsy to escape anything. Tetsukumo finally says that he will wait patiently to serve his full sentence, and after finishing it, he will return to his shinobi village. Even though he may not be welcomed back, Jugo gives him a few final words of encouragement and then takes his leave. These words cause the boy to spend the next several hours reflecting on what happened. Right after this, we return to the present where Jugo was fighting Musashi and has obtained a very powerful transformation. Jugo once again declares that he will not forgive the people who stole his freedom by placing the shackles on his hands and neck. He then launches a powerful attack that destroys part of the battlefield and the bleachers, sending everyone into a panic over the enormous power Jugo has unleashed. Yamato managed to save Jugo's friends, and all the other guards go on high alert to help evacuate the rest of the inmates. His companions at that moment cannot believe what is clearly happening and what Jugo has turned into. Jugo, filled with rage, launches himself at Musashi again, and both of them exchange powerful attacks. Jugo even arrives and strikes another part of the stadium with a sword blow. Momoko, very concerned, wonders what has become of the shackles on his hands, since it appears they are what took the form of his swords. She also wonders whether Jugo is still human at this moment. She orders that both Jugo and Musashi be captured, but they are stopped by an attack from Musashi. Jugo seizes the opportunity and hurls a sword strike at Musashi, which he narrowly manages to dodge. Musashi tells him he will not fall for that attack again, and a flashback is then revealed of when Jugo and Musashi had their first encounter. Jugo, in this same transformed form, struck Musashi with a sword blow that left him completely blind. Since then, Musashi has sworn to take revenge on him despite having lost his sight. Back with both of them, Musashi summons a circle of fire that prevents the guards from interfering. However, after saying several things to Jugo, Jugo gets angry and tells him to stop talking so much. So he charges an attack at the ground which breaks apart the circle of fire surrounding them. Jugo's friends are very worried, since if he continues like this, he will face serious consequences and end up being placed in maximum security. But Yamato, who is standing next to them, tells them that Jugo must keep fighting or else attacking other officers could lead to a trial, since carrying sharp or flammable objects is a very serious infraction in the prison. Jugo and Musashi continue fighting, and Yasakura tries to intervene in the fight, but Musashi launches a fire attack to keep any guards from getting involved. At that instant, Kai and Salmon appear, using their weapons as a shield and blocking the attack. The guards consider Musashi just a small fry and immediately all of them rush at him together. They manage to bind and capture him in a kind of cage by combining attacks from Salmon, Kiji, and Yasakura. On the other side, they now need to capture Jugo. Hajime readies his weapon and after firing at Jugo, Jugo easily deflects the bullets. He also counterattacks, but Hajime blocks it. His companions can no longer hold back and jump into the ring to help capture Jugo. They manage to grab him, but due to his strength, he breaks free. Nico and Rock try to restrain him again, but Jugo knocks them both out with a single blow. Just as Uno approaches, he tells Jugo to remember that they are friends, but Jugo attacks him without thinking. At that moment, Hajime appears and manages to save Uno, telling him to stay back and not let his guard down like that. Hajime then delivers a punch to Jugo's stomach, which immediately brings him crashing down to his knees. Hajime begins beating Jugo, and Uno begs him not to harm him any further. At the moment Hajime is about to deliver the final blow, Momoko stops him and says that is enough. She also declares the Namba tournament finished. A few days later, we see the supervisors gathered together talking about what happened at the tournament. Salmon is somewhat upset because Hajime essentially left Jugo half dead, and guards should not use their full strength on inmates. Salmon comments that after what Hajime did, none of them can eat peacefully at the banquet the prison held. Since Hajime does not want to hear them talking about it anymore, he leaves the room. Hajime then goes to cell 13, and we see that Uno receives him very angrily over what Hajime did to Jugo and tries to go after him. However, Hajime tells him he went a little too far with Jugo, but that his intention was never to kill him, so Uno comes to his senses and has no choice but to calm down. Hajime also tells Uno that Jugo is still unconscious and may wake up in 1 or 2 days, since Jugo is not currently in a cell. Uno explains that for them, Jugo is a very special companion and friend, since no one but them understands the kind of life Jugo lives and everything he feels. He finally tells Hajime that if he believes Jugo is a monster, then the real monster is Hajime for everything he did. These words immediately cause Hajime to leave the area. A little while later, Satoru is speaking with Hajime when Mitsuru suddenly arrives. He tells Hajime that he has brought a letter from the Warden herself, and then proceeds to read it, stating that Hajime has been suspended for the next 3 days. These words leave Hajime stunned, since he is a workaholic and will have nothing to do during those days. In another scene, we see that Momoko is very sad because she had to punish Hajime this way. 3 days later, we see Hajime returning to his duties, and Satoru informs him that no one from cell 13 has attempted to escape. When Hajime heads to the cell, he runs into Yasakura, and Hajime thanks him for covering for him during the days he was away. Yasakura also tells him that Jugo has already woken up, and Hajime responds that he is going to see him now to interrogate him. Yasakura gets upset with Hajime, since Hajime was the one who put him in a coma. However, Hajime tells him he is not referring to Jugo but to Musashi. Yasakura says he has tried to speak with Musashi, but Musashi refuses to talk with any of them until he can speak with Jugo. Yasakura thinks it is a very good idea for both of them to talk, since they could find answers about the powers both of them possess. He tells Hajime that until then he will have custody of Musashi. He also gives him a security radio and tells him that until that point, neither of the two will be allowed to speak with each other, clearly referring to Jugo and Musashi. After these words, Hajime leaves, and Yasakura arrives at a maximum security cell and asks Musashi how he is holding up. Musashi tells him he would have preferred being in a maximum security cell over the dungeon. Yasakura also places a radio on the floor and tells him he should talk with Jugo. In a parallel scene, we see Hajime arrive where Jugo is and say that he has turned off all the cameras in the area, with the intention of provoking him into trying to escape. However, Jugo responds that he has no intention of doing so since he feels no emotion. Hajime also brings a radio and tells him he should resolve the matter with Musashi. Musashi then speaks to Jugo through the radio and asks if he knows anything about the person who placed the shackles on his hands and neck. Jugo gets upset and responds that he only knows that the person has a scar on his neck and that he would like to know as much information about the person as possible. Musashi begins mocking Jugo and asks if he only transformed just to find that out. He also tells Jugo that if that is the problem, he should simply cut off his extremities. He says this in a mocking tone. He also tells Jugo that if he does not want those shackles, then Musashi himself wants them, since this will be a way for Musashi to get even closer to that person. The reason Musashi is also looking for that person is to finish him off. These words leave Jugo very surprised, since he did not expect Musashi to want to go to such extremes. Musashi also explains that by having these shackles placed on him, it is practically as though Jugo carries a curse. And compared to Musashi, who has had the condition of being able to use fire since he can remember, he describes how this situation brought him many problems since childhood, since people saw him as if he were a monster. That was until he crossed paths with the man with the scar. That man had promised Musashi he could put an end to the boy's suffering. However, he only wanted to use Musashi as a guinea pig for his experiments. Musashi also explains that the shackles on Jugo are very advanced for their time, since they can cause Jugo's hands to transform into swords. He also mentions that they turned him into a monster, since they helped him gain control of his power. One day he tried to attack that man, but the man managed to knock him down with a sword strike. Finally, Musashi adds that just like Jugo's, another pair of shackles was created. This leaves Jugo in shock, unable to believe that there is another pair of shackles that the scarred man placed on someone. Musashi says that he wants Jugo's shackles because combined with his natural fire power, he feels that he could win a battle and is willing to risk his life to be able to finish off that person. He finally adds that he is eager for revenge, and that after that, if they want, they can take him wherever they like. Musashi then mentions that the prison doctors implanted a chip in him, which causes his power to be immediately suppressed every time his body feels even the slightest spark of heat or fire. He laments to Jugo that in his current state, he cannot help him remove the shackles. After these final words, he says goodbye to Jugo. Jugo says it does not seem possible that Musashi believes he can defeat that person in his current state. Hajime tells him it is actually much worse, because through the many escape attempts he has been able to analyze that Jugo is very empty emotionally, and he had thought there was a deeper motive or something driving him to escape. But the reality is that Jugo simply did it because he had nothing else to do, as if it were out of boredom. Jugo, very troubled, asks if the others have something that he does not. Hajime, before leaving, tells him that the others possess ambition, since Jugo has been going from prison to prison trying to find that person, meaning he has nothing else to live for. Jugo gets upset with these words and says Hajime is completely wrong, but Hajime continues saying other things to the point where Jugo ends up agreeing with him, and a memory from his childhood is then shown. Jugo narrates that for as long as he can remember, he never had any desire or wish. He did not even have any interest in the tournament they held. He adds that ever since he has had the shackles, finding the person responsible has been his only motivation, and he begins to reflect on why everyone around him knows their own lives and has many hobbies they enjoy as well as goals in life. Jugo also adds that he felt envy for all the people around him, since noticing all the desires each person had made him remember even more the shackles he wears and the way he transforms. Jugo begins to cry and says he never wanted to hurt Musashi or anyone else, and that he truly wants to find a way to remove the shackles so he does not have to transform into this monster that he hates so much. Hajime asks him why he is with them, and this question causes Jugo to reflect deeply. Jugo responds by asking what use he could be, but Hajime suddenly mentions that they won this year's tournament, meaning the winners can have anything they wish for. He immediately asks Jugo what he wants, but knowing that Jugo has no ambition, he applies pressure and tells him that in 5 minutes it will be time to return to cell 13, so he only has 5 minutes to think of something he genuinely wants. Jugo begins to reflect and thinks about how he has always been running from all the situations and problems he gets himself into. He then has a memory of when he was talking with his companions about going outside the prison. His companions imagine many things they could do if they could get out, but the protagonist truly has nothing on the outside that motivates him. Despite this, he knows that when he sees someone else with motivations and desires, he is able to see a completely happy face. After a few minutes, Hajime tells him his time to make a wish is up, but in that instant, Jugo drops to his knees and asks to be given a chance. This makes Hajime happy, and he tells Jugo that he is finally starting to sound like a real human being. He then tosses Jugo his inmate number and tells him that if he takes it, he will return to cell 13, which Hajime is responsible for. Jugo then begins to free himself from his chains and takes the plate with his inmate number, finally telling Hajime that he will be under his care. In a scene transition, we go back several days to when Hajime had been suspended for 3 days. We see Yasakura arriving at cell 13, and the group is shocked to find out he will be watching over them. A little later, Kiji, Salmon, and Yasakura meet with Momoko, and she tells them that they will need to take turns supervising Wing 13. The men are shocked and ask her why they need to do this. Momoko explains that there are many troublemakers in that wing, so they will need to cover for Hajime during the next few days. Yasakura has no choice but to accept the warden's orders. A few hours later, Yasakura accompanies the group as they take Nico to his medical checkup. At that moment, the guard thinks Hajime should discipline them a little more. They then arrive at the infirmary and meet the head of the medical department named Akina. We also see that the subjects who lost to Jugo's group are there. Nico asks the doctor to give him medicine, but Akina responds that he must examine him first, since Nico has a condition that makes him very easily susceptible to other people's illnesses in his surroundings. Since the tournament has passed, he will need to have an examination. The doctor adds that during the tournament Nico was able to copy the attacks and abilities of his opponent without taking into account that if the opponent had different musculature or other physical factors. It causes his body to become far more overloaded than it should, meaning he could even die from using a high-level technique like the one he performed against Yupa. The group is interrupted when a robot nurse named Kagu appears. She causes Jugo's companions to become very excited over the robot girl, and they ask her to go on a date with them. Honey and Troyce, who were present, get angry with the group and tell them they should treat her more delicately. However, Troyce suddenly starts asking her about her underwear, making it clear to everyone that both of them are perverts. A few hours later, it is Kiji's turn to watch over cell 13, and he begins to cry upon hearing how worried Jugo's friends are about him. They have even created a small pillow that resembles Jugo's presence. Kiji then tells them it is time for them to be educated a little, so he picks up a map and begins explaining that Namba is an impenetrable prison on a remote island in Japanese territory. The group is fascinated to learn just how much the prison contains, and Kiji continues explaining each impressive detail of the facility. Uno then hugs the Jugo pillow, and for some reason Kiji ends up kicking him. Uno gets angry at Kiji and tells him that if he hits him again he could ruin his face, so Kiji gets angry in turn and tells him that if he had to give them a grade he would give Uno a 2. A dispute begins between the two of them over which one is the most attractive. At that moment, both are interrupted by Satoru, who tells them they were making far too much noise. However, upon noticing that Satoru is much better looking than both of them, they get angry at him too and tell him to get out. The following day we see Salmon and Satoru making their way to cell 13. Salmon suspects that Hajime is hiding something in his cell, but when they arrive they find the group completely asleep. This makes Salmon angry since the sleeping period is already over. They are then interrupted when Yamato arrives. The group immediately tries to hide, but Salmon finds them very easily. Here we see that Yamato came to take them to train as he usually does. But since the group is very lazy, they say they do not want to because their bodies will hurt. Tetsukumo also appears, and Yamato mentions that he is the only one with a passion for training. Since every time training begins, Tetsukumo joins without hesitation. The group comes up with a plan to avoid being dragged along to train with Yamato, but after a brief conversation among them, their plan fails. Yamato takes Rock, and Salmon stays behind thinking about taking the other two. Uno hides behind Nico. which makes Salmon a little nervous since he is somewhat afraid Uno will go out of control like he did the other day during the tournament. However, Rock shouts that because of the medicine Nico took, he will not be able to transform or attack like he did in the tournament. These words upset Salmon a little since the boy was trying to trick him, and he ends up taking all of them along to train. Back in the present with Jugo, we see him getting some fresh air outside the prison alongside Hajime. He also cannot believe that Hajime is giving him a second chance. As they head back to the cell, Jugo wonders about why Musashi revealed all that information to him about the scarred man. Since Jugo still does not understand the reason, Hajime tells him he does know why, and that it is likely because Jugo is the only one capable of defeating the man with the scar. Now that Musashi has lost his fire abilities, he is trusting Jugo to do it for him. As Hajime lights a cigarette, he tells Jugo that despite continuing to search for the other man, he will not allow Jugo to escape, so Hajime personally tells him that he will find the person. Shortly after, Jugo and Hajime arrive at the cell, and we see all the group giving him a warm welcome. The exception is Uno, who punches him and asks where he has been all this time. This is clearly his way of showing affection toward Jugo. After talking for a bit, Jugo kneels before them and apologizes for everything he caused during the tournament, promising them that he will never transform again since he could have harmed them. The group, after thinking it over a little, accepts his apology, and Jugo, with tears in his eyes, remembers the wonderful moments he has shared with them, bringing everyone to a heartfelt moment that also makes Hajime feel a little emotional. In a scene transition, we see Momoko very excited because Hajime is coming to visit her. But after saying a few words, she realizes that Mitsuru is there, and he starts teasing her since she is very nervous and does not know how to greet Hajime after so many days. Hajime then arrives and after opening the door sees that Momoko has just given Mitsuru a tremendous beating, so Hajime panics, and after setting his uniform on the warden's desk, he runs out of the room in terror. That night we see Jugo's group sleeping, and we are shown a nightmare that Rock is having. In it, the boy is seen running away from his family, and after reaching the streets, he began getting involved with gangs that eventually landed him in prison. Rock then wakes up and realizes that Jugo is watching him. The following morning, we see Liang training alongside Yupa. Yupa gets annoyed because he does not want Liang training next to him, but Liang is very determined since his defeat has pushed him to train intensely. The group is interrupted when one of the guards tells Liang that Rock wants to see him. Liang then arrives at the cafeteria where Jugo's group is, and we see that Rock is very warm toward him, sharing a slice of freshly made pizza from the new stone oven he had requested as his tournament reward. Liang says that in his wing they also make pizza, but the group tells him that cooking in a stone oven is far better. Even one of the guards from Liang's wing is seen eating and has no choice but to try it. Liang is also charmed by the flavor, and Rock tells him that stone oven pizza is superior. We also see Yamato eating pizza with rice, since the combination is extremely unusual and his fellow guard points this out. Yamato responds that as a proper Japanese person he has to eat rice with every meal. During the next hour we see Shiro, the cook, who brings other dishes to Liang that the boy finds absolutely wonderful. Liang tells the group that thinking back on it, he never had time before to really appreciate food, and he is now clearly enjoying it and becoming aware of many things. Rock tells him that after every fight he always gets a strong appetite and just wants to eat to satisfy himself. He sees food as a motivation to keep fighting and always have a reason to push forward, in addition to being grateful for the food on his plate every day. After hearing these words, Liang apologizes to Rock, since during the tournament fight he had called his wish ridiculous. Liang finally thanks Rock and takes his leave, and Rock tells him that he has clearly changed a great deal and is much more mature now. Rock tells him that all of that is because of him. A brief flashback is then revealed of when Rock and Jugo were in another prison. Rock had been placed in maximum security and was not being given food, but at that point, Jugo appeared and offered him some of the food he had. However, Rock refused it because it looked pretty bad. Jugo said that in that case, they would have to go out and find something good to eat, so they escaped and went to eat hamburgers at a proper restaurant. Back in the present, Rock thanks Jugo once again for having helped him change. After a short conversation, Rock asks Shiro if there is any food left because he wants to bring some to Nico. In a parallel scene, we see Nico having a nightmare since he is in the infirmary being given various examinations. At that moment, Jugo and the others arrive, and Nico is delighted by the food they have brought him. The group notices that Akina seems a bit grumpy, so they ask if he has been fighting with his wife. A little indignantly, he says he does not consider that a fight and adds that he cannot stand his wife. At that instant, the wall breaks open and we meet Kasari, the head of the prison's scientific department and Akina's wife. The girl enters wielding a large bazooka and tells him she hopes he dies very soon as their marriage is quite toxic. A dispute immediately breaks out, and this prompts Kagu, who was created as the daughter of both of them, to ask if they are going to get divorced. These words make both of them reflect immediately and they calm down. Kasari also tells Nico that the video game console he had requested as his tournament reward is ready. They then head to a room that is essentially a full arcade of video games. Nico is completely excited since they can now enjoy all of their favorite games. As a final request, Nico asks Hajime if he can bring Yupa since he wants to play with his master. Yupa and Kai then arrive at the room and the boy does not seem very happy. Yupa also gets annoyed with Nico since he never said he would be his master and tells him that if Nico had beaten him in the tournament, he would simply make him his apprentice. Kai teases Yupa and tells him he should just accept being the boy's master. We also see Hajime and Salmon get into another conflict since Salmon does not want his inmates mixing with Jugo's group and they begin arguing. Kiji gives both of them a beating to calm things down. Back with the group, we see them very excitedly playing games. At that moment, Mitsuru appears before Jugo and asks if he does not like video games, since Mitsuru and Kasari were the ones responsible for creating these games. Jugo responds that he does not hate them but has simply never tried playing. Mitsuru responds that if he never plays, he will never know what it feels like to enjoy one. At that moment, Nico takes Jugo by the hand and brings him over to enjoy playing. They arrive at a prize claw machine, and we see that Jugo, after trying to grab a plushie, ends up letting go. Uno then arrives and tells him he is a total professional at claw machines. He immediately begins playing and turns out to be exactly that, winning a plushie that looks like Jugo. Just as Uno wins one of Nico, Nico shows his plushie to Yupa, but Yupa thinks this kind of thing is very ridiculous, so Uno says it is probably because Yupa does not know how to play. Yupa's pride kicks in and he immediately walks over to the claw machine. After many attempts, we see him getting very frustrated and trying to destroy the machine, but the group stops him. After trying again and again, he finally manages to capture one of the plushies. This completely changes the boy's attitude, making Nico very happy. Kasari then appears and hands Nico a kind of emulator console featuring current games, telling him it is what he requested as his wish. However, Nico says he has been greatly enjoying playing together with his companions. Shortly after, Jugo and Nico have a conversation, and it is revealed that the reason the boy enjoys manga and video games so much is because of Jugo. When they were in another prison, Jugo freed him and showed him a manga that he had clearly found very boring. But from that moment on, the boy became a complete fanatic for those kinds of things. Back in the present, Nico thanks him, since because of that action he recovered his will to live. Jugo immediately asks if Nico can teach him how to play. While Rock and Uno are playing, we see the atmosphere become a little tense. When Yasakura passes by with Musashi, everyone goes on alert, knowing that something terrible could happen like the other day. But Jugo tells Musashi that everything is fine and no fight like that other day will happen. Despite Jugo's words, Uno remains a little distrustful and starts arguing with Jugo since he wants Musashi to apologize to Jugo. So Musashi, upon hearing this argument, ends up bowing toward Jugo as a way of asking for forgiveness. This excites Uno, who says that only decent people ask for forgiveness, so he completely changes his attitude toward Musashi and ends up extending his hand to him as a show of respect for having apologized. Finally, Uno says goodbye to Musashi and invites him to come play with him another day. A little while later, Yasakura brings Musashi back to his cell, and Musashi is very thoughtful since Uno invited him to play. Musashi tells Yasakura he does not know what to do with the invitation since he knows he cannot leave his cell much. However, Yasakura is moved by the words Uno said and tells Musashi he could consider giving him permission to leave. But before doing so, Musashi will need to answer some questions about his past. Musashi narrates that when he was just a child, his body temperature was far higher than normal. Despite this, his mother always raised him with a great deal of love. Until after a few years, he had an incident in which he began writhing in pain, feeling as though his throat was burning completely. Even though doctors ran every kind of examination, his health was always found to be in good condition. Things began returning to normal, and Musashi had gradually been losing his fear of everything, until one day when he was no longer a child, and in the middle of town, he suddenly burst into flames. Doctors concluded that he had spontaneous combustion, a kind of phenomenon that causes a person to ignite without any explanation. That day he survived by a miracle, since his entire body had been completely burned. He also narrates that despite this being such an unusual phenomenon, his parents still smiled at him and showed him love, which helped him gather a great deal of courage and face his problems head-on. He also explains that at school, everyone began judging him and could not believe that he was something quite different from what he was at birth. This drove the boy into desperation and made him far more afraid of himself than of other people. One day he arrived at his parents' house and found that everything was completely on fire, and the townspeople began pointing at him as the one responsible for the blaze. They began calling him a monster, and something started to change inside him. Back in the present, Musashi says that being in prison has been the best thing that has happened to him in a long time, since people would never judge him again. Yasakura asks if that incident happened in the German prison, and Musashi confirms it and mentions that it was there where he met the scarred man. Musashi adds that the man is known as the supervisor of that prison and was the one who turned him into a true monster, having used him as an experiment and guinea pig. Musashi also explains that he never wanted anything that the man did to him, but the man, along with another person, told him he should be grateful since he is a human being very different from the rest. Here we discover that a man with yellow hair named Elf was the one who burned down Musashi's parents' home, since all of that was part of the plan to bring Musashi to them. As an experiment, Musashi was understandably furious and grabbed Elf by the throat. Elf tells him he did it because no one cares about what happens to prisoners. After hearing that they might take him in for another round of experiments, Musashi became furious and attacked Elf. And just when he attacked the scarred man, the man blocked his flames and struck him with a sword blow that left him unconscious. Musashi tells Yasakura that he should not have to believe everything he said, since he is used to people simply not believing him. But Yasakura responds that after watching him and Jugo fight, he knows what Musashi is saying is true. He also says that he has heard rumors about prisoners who had been used in human experimentation. Yasakura adds that when he was part of the police force, he managed to investigate this situation, which he found very strange. And just like Musashi, none of the people around him believed him because he was limited by his position as an officer. So he made the decision to become a prison guard in order to thoroughly investigate other prisons from the inside. Yasakura, increasingly angry as he speaks, says he cannot forgive people who abuse their power and use other prisoners as experiments. Finally, Yasakura gets down on one knee and extends his hand, adding that he swears he will uncover the truth and expose it to everyone. After thinking it over for a few seconds, Musashi accepts Yasakura's word. In a scene transition, we see Jugo's group talking with Troyce and Honey. Uno mentions that he brought the group to a special room. When they arrive, they find it completely empty, and Uno tells them he brought them there to build a game room with anything they want. Shortly after, we see the guards bringing things in, and Hajime gets angry since they have been used like pack animals. Uno is delighted by the sofa they brought, and the guards are completely baffled by what is going on with the inmates. We can also see that Uno asked other inmates for help in bringing things to their new game room. Finally, Mitsuru brings some video game machines and Uno is completely happy with the guard. Hajime, however, is the complete opposite, since all of this generates enormous stress for him. During the following hours, the group begins playing the various games that have been brought in. After a long while, we see Musashi arriving along with Yasakura at the room where the group is gathered. The other guards comment that it is a miracle they let Musashi out, since he was being held in a subterranean maximum security cell. After a little while, Hajime ruins the moment and informs them that it is time to return to their cell. The group begins to protest, and Hajime, furious, ends up giving everyone a beating. Later that night, we see Jugo unable to sleep, since for the first time something is troubling him in a way that is not unpleasant and has him completely restless. He tells Uno, who is also awake, that he does not quite understand what he is feeling. Uno begins mockingly listing all of Jugo's negative qualities, making Jugo feel bad like a child hearing all of this. But despite that, Uno also tells him there are very special things that define him as a person, and as a good friend tells Jugo that he will make sure his life is much more fun, whether they are inside the prison or in the depths of hell itself. Jugo interrupts the boy's words and tells him he needs to step outside for a minute. When he gets there, he is struck by the beauty of the sky and the stars, and thinks that to be a winner one simply needs to live happily. He finally thinks that this is the first time he has looked forward to the day that comes next. But at that instant, Elf appears behind him taking his shoulder with a very sinister expression. And that is where the anime ends. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let me know what you thought. Do not forget to leave a like, it helps the channel more than you think. Subscribe to Hakai Realm and hit the bell so you never miss a recap. Until next time.